In the isolated town of Gallows Hill, there stood an ancient structure known as Hadley House. It was a mansion that loomed over the surrounding landscape, its blackened spires piercing the sky like the fingers of a corpse reaching from the grave. The townsfolk spoke of the house only in whispers, for it was said that a darkness dwelled within its walls, a darkness born from a history of tragedy and blood. The Hadley family, once prominent and respected, had met their end in that house under mysterious and gruesome circumstances. One by one they had perished, leaving behind a legacy of death that no one dared to disturb. After the last Hadley took their final breath, the house was abandoned, left to rot and be reclaimed by the encroaching forest. Years turned into decades, and the legend of Hadley House grew. It was a place where no sane person would venture, for it was said that the spirits of the Hadley family still roamed the halls, trapped in a perpetual state of torment. But legends have a way of attracting the curious, and it was this curiosity that brought a group of 4 friends to the gates of Hadley House one autumn evening. They were thrill-seekers, each one drawn to the adrenaline rush of the supernatural and the unknown. Their names were Sarah, the de facto leader, Alex, the skeptic, Jenna, the believer, and Kyle, the one who loved a good challenge. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of invincibility that only the young possess, they pushed open the creaking gates and made their way up the overgrown path to the front door of Hadley House. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and a chill wind seemed to whisper warnings as they approached. Sarah placed her hand on the doorknob, the metal icy to the touch, and with a deep breath pushed the door open. The interior of Hadley House was a cathedral of shadows, the remnants of its former grandeur now just a ghostly echo. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights as they stepped inside, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of dust that covered the floor. "Welcome to Hadley House," Sarah said, her voice betraying a hint of unease. They moved through the foyer and into the main hall, the walls lined with portraits of the Hadley family. The eyes of the painted figures seemed to follow them, and Jenna shivered, clutching her camera a little tighter. As they explored the ground floor, Alex scoffed at the creaks and groans of the old house. "It's just settling," he assured them. But Carl wasn't so sure. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The group found the dining room, its table set as if waiting for guests that would never arrive. A thick layer of dust covered the fine china and crystal glasses, and at the head of the table sat an empty chair, its high back facing them like a silent sentinel. Sarah suggested they split up to cover more ground, a decision that would later haunt them. They agreed to meet back in the dining room in an hour, and with that they each chose a direction and disappeared into the bowels of Hadley House. Jenna, with her camera at the ready, ascended the grand staircase to the second floor. She wandered the long hallway, her heart racing with every shadow that flickered in the corner of her eye. In one of the bedrooms, she found a child's crib, the mobile above it swaying gently as if stirred by an unseen hand. Meanwhile, Carl descended into the depths of the house, finding his way to the cellar. The air grew colder as he descended, and he could see his breath in the dim light of his flashlight. The cellar was a labyrinth of stone and darkness, the walls lined with shelves that held jars of unidentifiable substances, their contents long since decayed. Alex remained on the ground floor, determined to debunk any so-called paranormal activity. He entered the library, a room filled with books that crumbled at the touch. As he perused the titles, he heard the faint sound of music playing, a haunting melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sarah explored the west wing of the house, where she found the conservatory. The glass was broken and the plants had overgrown, creating a wild tangle of greenery that seemed almost alive. She spotted a piano in the center of the room, its keys yellowed and warped. A single note hung in the air, lingering before dissipating into silence. As the hour drew to a close, each friend felt a growing sense of dread. They made their way back to the dining room, but what they found there was not the reunion they had expected. The chair at the head of the table was no longer empty. In it sat a figure shrouded in darkness, its face obscured by the shadows. The air around them grew heavy, and a voice, barely more than a whisper, filled the room. "You should not have come here," it hissed. Panic set in as the figure rose from the chair, the sound of bones cracking echoing through the hall. The friends turned to run, but the doors slammed shut, trapping them within the walls of Hadley House. And so, the nightmare began. The friends stood frozen in terror as the figure advanced towards them. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, as if it were a marionette being pulled by unseen strings. Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but fear clouded her thoughts. "Who are you?" she managed to stammer, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure stopped and the room fell silent, save for the pounding of their hearts. Then it spoke, its voice a symphony of suffering and malice. "I am the keeper of Hadley House," it said, "and you are now part of its legacy." With a swift motion, the figure pointed to the door, and the heavy wooden barrier swung open with a groan. Explore, if you dare, it continued, but know this, by dawn, one of you will join the Hadley family forever. Before they could respond, the figure dissolved into a cloud of darkness that seeped into the walls, leaving them alone once more. The silence was suffocating, and the fear that gripped them was palpable. We need to stick together, Alex said, his skepticism replaced by a very real sense of danger. We find a way out now. They agreed, their previous bravado replaced by the instinct to survive. They retraced their steps, trying doors and windows, but each was sealed as if by magic. The house seemed to be alive, its layout shifting and changing like a maze designed to confuse and disorient them. As they searched for an escape, the house began to reveal its true nature. Whispers echoed through the halls, ghostly apparitions flitted in the periphery of their vision, and objects moved of their own accord. The air grew colder with each passing moment, and an oppressive feeling of despair settled over them. Jenna's camera captured images that defied explanation, faces in the wallpaper, figures standing in the background of photos, and orbs of light that darted about with intent. She clung to the device as if it were a lifeline, the lens her only window into the unseen horrors that surrounded them. Kyle, usually the most composed of the group, began to unravel. He saw shadows move with purpose, heard his name whispered by voices that seemed to come from the very walls. He felt eyes upon him, watching, waiting. Sarah, trying to maintain a semblance of control, took charge. We need to find the heart of the house, she said. The keeper spoke of a legacy. There has to be something, a source of this curse. They made their way to the library where Alex had heard the music. There, among the decaying books and the remnants of knowledge long forgotten, they found a journal. It was bound in leather, the pages yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. The journal belonged to the last lord of Hadley House, and it spoke of a ritual, a pact made with a force beyond comprehension. In exchange for power and wealth, the Hadley family had given themselves to the darkness, and the house was the anchor that held their souls in eternal servitude. The heart of the house, Sarah whispered, realization dawning on her. It's not a place, it's a bond, a tie to this world that we need to break. They scoured the journal for an answer, a way to sever the connection and free themselves from the house's grip. As they read, they pieced together the tragic history of the Hadleys, each entry a window into the madness that had consumed them. The ritual required a sacrifice, a life willingly given to the darkness. Each generation of the Hadley family had provided this offering, but the last lord had faltered, his love for his children greater than his desire for power. It was this act of defiance that had cursed the house, trapping them all in a cycle of death and rebirth. We need to reverse the ritual, Jenna said, her voice trembling. But how? What can we offer that it doesn't already have? The answer lay in the final pages of the journal. The last lord had discovered a counter-ritual, a way to appease the darkness with a different kind of sacrifice, one of pure intent, a selfless act that could break the cycle. They needed to offer something of themselves, a memory, a secret, a piece of their very essence. It was a dangerous gambit, for the darkness could just as easily consume them, but it was the only chance they had. As the night wore on, the house grew more aggressive, its manifestations more physical and terrifying. They could feel the dawn approaching, the deadline set by the keeper drawing near. With no other options, they began the counter-ritual. One by one, they offered up their sacrifices, baring their souls to the unseen force that hungered for them. Kyle offered a memory of his brother who had passed away when they were children, a memory he had clung to out of guilt and love. Jenna revealed her deepest fear, the terror of being forgotten, of leaving no mark on the world. Alex confessed a secret he had never spoken aloud, the weight of it lifting as he spoke the words. Finally, it was Sarah's turn. She stepped forward, her sacrifice the most significant of all. She offered her dreams, the very hopes that had driven her to explore and seek out the unknown. As she spoke, the darkness gathered around her, swirling like a storm of pure void. The house shook as if in pain, the walls groaning and the floors buckling. A scream filled the air, a sound of anguish and defeat, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The friends found themselves standing outside Hadley House, the sun rising on the horizon. The house itself was no longer the menacing presence it had been, it was just a house, old and decrepit. They had broken the curse, freed the spirits of the Hadley family, and in doing so, had saved themselves. They embraced, their bond stronger for the horrors they had faced. As they walked away from Gallows Hill, they knew that their lives would never be the same. They had stared into the abyss, challenged the darkness, and emerged victorious. But the scars of that night would remain with them forever, a reminder of the price of curiosity and the strength of the human spirit. And Hadley House, now just a relic of the past, stood silent, its legacy of shadows finally put to rest.